everyone, and welcome to the Winging It F1 podcast, and potentially chaotic Winging It F1 podcast, because we've been recording for an hour or speaking on the Zoom call for an hour, and we've still not got around to doing the podcast. So that's fantastic. But with me,
we just recorded it just then.
We've been recording like 20 minutes. We haven't even introduced the podcast.
The voice you just heard there is the shaved Ewok himself, Nigel Chu. Nigel, do you think England are winning the World Cup?
No, not this year.
Well, I can put screenshots up to prove otherwise, so that's that sorted. Freddie, do you think England are winning the World Cup?
I don't think so, but I don't know. In all seriousness, on the World Cup, I'm just not really feeling it, and it's.
I agree.
And
yeah, I'm not feeling it either.
I'm completely fine with the Winter World Cup and there being a World Cup in a part of the world where it's hot and it's that kind of thing, because that's fine. It's just where it is for this is just we've discussed this. We've got loads of stuff on the Qatar Grand Prix from last year. We've got stuff on Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and everything. Like, it does feel like a lot of the F1 conversation is spilling into the football world, but just on a gargantuan scale, and it's not very nice. But anyway, sorry, I don't think England are going to do well. Well, they'll do okay, but they're not. I don't know.
Semis at best. At best.
What you said yesterday. I kind of agree. I think.
Oh, you kind of agree now. Oh, right. Oh.
I think
on the human rights issues, Nigel. I mean, come on.
Oh, right. Sorry. I thought you meant the England stuff. Sorry. Sorry.
Oh, he agrees
I meant
the human rights issues.
No.
Oh, fine. Dictator Adam over here.
Just to be clear,
I meant to get this podcast back moving, to be honest. But I think I was feeling hyped up for it until the game started. I was just watching the coverage, and it all feels very. They're trying. You can feel them trying to avoid it or having to avoid it or whatever. It's just kind of.
I disagree. They talked about it for the first 20 minutes on the BBC, at least.
On the BBC, but in the commentary of the game, it was
a
deal.
I mean, if you turn on, watch the last.
Most people turned on, I'd suggest.
Yeah, I watched.
That was very much the first lines of that were very much right. Let's get on with the football, which was.
Yeah,
in context of the show and with the opening ceremony coverage, and that does make sense. But
I think it's kind of turning it on 10 minutes before the game kicks off and watching that, and it feels like there's a huge elephant in the room, and that kind of doesn't feel very comfortable. So see if it's different when England are playing, but I'm just not as hyped up as usually would be. The
England game's tomorrow. As this is released, it will be on the day of the England game. Mad.
First of 7 victories for the Three Lions.
Are we transitioning into a current affairs podcast for the off season?
Yes,
we could do that. Yeah.
Crikey.
That won't be interesting.
Let's brush up on Rishi Sunak and the budget and everything. Crikey.
I wish Rishi Sunak would brush up on the budget, but there we go. We're not here to discuss current affairs or the World Cup, really, but it's interesting to hear people's thoughts. If we'd started recording an hour ago, then they could hear my thoughts for an alternate World Cup, but that's just...
It's a good thing we're not recording 1 hour ago, or else we will... It's really not.
It would be a bonus. It would be a bonus podcast clip at this point. It would be a bonus podcast, to be honest. It wouldn't even be a clip. Maybe longer than this one, because it was Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. That was not the worst. It was 3.6 for Ricciardo. Not bad, not terrible. Not great, not terrible. Butchered the quote. But it happened. It was helped by some spice at the end and a lot of happiness about Seb's career. But it's Abu Dhabi. So what did you think of the Grand Prix, Freddie?
It was an event Grand Prix, exactly what you're saying, with the storylines around it. I do think I was remarkably interested in the fight for second for some reason. I was interested, so that's fun. It was a Grand Prix that was there. It was a Grand Prix that happened, but it wasn't the worst and it wasn't the best of the season. I enjoyed it, and it was a nice, easy, calming, relaxing end of the season, to be honest.
Yeah.
Nigel, how many runs to gun would you give it? More or less than 3.6?
Out of 5?
No, I don't know what the scale is.
I kind of need to know the scale, don't I?
How do you mark it out of 5 then? But it's out of 50 because you're putting in decimal points.
Out of 5, 2.5 probably.
Then it's 25 out of 50.
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say, it kind of summed up the season with Verstappen at the head of the field, like dominating, and then they had Perez and Leclerc fighting for second. Ferrari didn't quite have the car to that was as good as Red Bull, as has been the case over the season. Mercedes were in the third place again, not able to challenge for the win, and then you had everyone else kind of behind that. So we kind of just like summarised the season in that one race for me, I thought.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, the qualifying session was interesting because Hamilton was the lead Mercedes, and he was pretty much exactly what he was off the pole time in Bahrain at the start of the season. So it was full circle in that regard. But yeah, I think, it's kind of, I think, like you say, it reflected the season. It kind of had the potential to thrill, but never kind of really delivered on that. But there was some stuff at the end with Leclerc and Perez that ended up being quite close within 2 seconds. So we will get on to that. But first, a word for Verstappen, who kind of finished his championship as he's finished his season, really.
15
Nigel,
wins.
I know
Lovely
you've been
stuff.
very looking forward to doing this. You said you shed a tear after the season was finished. So, before that, you want to be happy about Verstappen winning again.
I did not shed a tear. I've not cried for quite a long time. What was the question?
Live
Was
to
I
the
happy?
podcast audience then.
Verstappen, I mean, he's just flawless, wasn't he? I think he was holding back as well. I think he was trying to almost tow Perez along with like a 2-3 second gap, so Perez could get a tiny slipstream on the long straights, not lose out in the corners. I think Verstappen had a lot in hand. Class of the field once again. He's got absolutely no weaknesses, and for him to deliver, as I've said so many times, at this high level, he's taking it to new consistency levels almost, I think, because even Hamilton in his dominant seasons like 2015 or 2020, he would have 2 or 3 off weekends on raw pace. He was off the pace. But with Verstappen, he never has a bad qualifying and race. Yes, he might have one or the other, like very rarely, of course. But in terms of raw pace, he's just unbeatable. And he just showed that against Perez. I think he had a lot in hand as well.
Oh well,
Yeah,
I will jump in there because I think it was flawless on the track. I think one weakness maybe his temperament, because I think in the last, obviously there was what happened at Brazil, and then he went on a remarkable tirade against kind of a lot of the F1 world on Thursday, and particularly hit out to people writing about what could have happened with him and Perez in Monaco, and saying if you don't have the full facts, write the full story. But I think that's a very naive view to have. And when a lot of them are saying what you're kind of hinting that it could be, then I just kind of think he handled that whole situation quite badly. And like I say, or like I said last episode, then we talked about him maturing, but this felt like a few steps back to me, because he just, for someone who's had such an easy season, he just seems to have been really riled by it. And obviously the abuse that came his way and his family's way on social media is unacceptable, but a lot of the stuff he was annoyed at wasn't that as well. So I think that was kind of the only mark on his kind of weekend, not in terms of his performance, but it just made me think about him in a slightly different light.
Yeah, I think, but I mean, I was going to say, I think his season's been very good from on track, of course, because you can't look at it and think anything else for his on track season, in my opinion. Talking about off weekends, there were weekends where he didn't get the result and things like that, but there were circumstances you could point to, but there are also times where it was just things just didn't go well. Say Singapore, say a few qualifyings and things like that. But I think for the most part, it's just been very good and very textbook. It's not been as dominant as the 15 wins would lead you to believe either, which is a definitely a mark in his favor. You look at the result today, and for the majority of the race, it was the sort of 2 second between the top 6 each of them kind of thing. But that's still then 12 seconds or so separating the top 6 throughout the majority of the race. So that's really close. When you look at a lot of other dominant performances, there's huge gaps between people, and they've been obvious supreme drives this year rather than supreme car performances as well. So I do think on that side, Max has been pretty exceptional. But I mean, we don't really expect anything else from him when he's behind the wheel of a car. He's an unbeatable force, and it is impressive to watch the way he just eases a car into success. his off-track temperament is a bit kind of touch and go, but I mean, there's nothing I can really say more on that, if that makes sense.
But put him behind the wheel, and my God, he is the best driver I've seen in F1. I have to say.
It was, as you said, an exceptional weekend and finish to the season for Verstappen, but it wasn't quite the perfect finish for Red Bull because Sergio Perez missed out on second place, what would have been the first Red Bull 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship, and he missed out by 3 points because he was beaten by Charles Leclerc to second place. It wouldn't have made a difference, actually, what happened in Brazil in the end, which is probably quite helpful for Red Bull going into the off-season. But it was a tie battle at the end. Nigel, do you think there's anything Perez could have done to beat Leclerc?
Not really. I think a lot of this segment, the praise has to go to Leclerc. He drove, as he called it, a pretty much perfect race. In the first stop, he was about 3 seconds behind after like lap 7-8, and then he closed within 2 seconds, got an undercut threat, forced Perez to pit, and then he basically did the same thing when Perez pitted for the second time. He closed down the gap, got within 2 seconds, was going to do the opposite to Perez, actually, I think Leclerc said to Sky that they were always going to commit to a one stop, and they tricked Red Bull. But either way, he got within undercut range, forced Perez to pit, and then his tyre management, considering some of the problems Ferrari have had in the second half of the season, was absolutely amazing. He got everything out of that car so much faster than Carlos Sainz, which we've seen a few times this year on Sundays. So I think Leclerc is probably the driver of the day for me. He got everything right. Ferrari nailed the strategy as well. And I don't think Perez could have done more. I think in the situation they were in, they had to cover it off almost, because if they tried to go for a one stop, Leclerc maybe would have overtaken Perez on track anyway, because he had fresher tyres by a few laps. So there wasn't too much more Red Bull could do, I think.
Leclerc was very impressive in that fight for second and all of that. I do think there are obviously elements of it didn't need to be coming down to this race for Leclerc, to be honest. He should really have been a little bit higher up. I'm not saying he should have been still in the championship fight, but there are definitely more kind of areas you can point to for the reason he's fighting for second than Perez. There's a blot in his copybook in this race as well for his lap 1 half weird dive thing, akin to what Verstappen did for the championship last year, but it's just it didn't really work, and it compromised him in a run down the first back straight, which probably would have had him in a better position going just on the first lap for the first part of the race otherwise. But then he was already back on the back foot and had to rely on the strategy and things like that. So, I mean, probably he wouldn't have been able to make it, but Ferrari were very delicate on their tyres at the start anyway. So who knows? But I do think that is a blot on his copybook for this race. But other than that, I completely agree. The way Ferrari and he handled that race from his side of the garage for the second place from the podium, they were always looking forward, and that was very impressive.
I do feel, though, if he got ahead on the first lap, it could have been a role reversal of what actually happened in the race. So it could have been Perez going long and then Leclerc to stop, and then who knows, it would have been 1 or 2 seconds at the end. So I think whatever strategy both teams played, it was always going to come down to 1 or 2 seconds, and the driver making the difference. And for me, Leclerc was slightly the better driver, and that made the difference in the end, I think.
Oh, yeah. I think a lot of Perez's race was quite scruffy. You look at the multiple sort of times he got stuck behind the wrong car, a few lockups here and there, not making the move count when it needed to on a lapped car or on Hamilton or whoever, or on Vettel, things like that. Yeah. So it was a scruffy race from Perez, and that really set him back, and that helped Leclerc's drive, of course. Yeah,
the move on Vettel, sorry, Adam, the move on Vettel, he got past but then lost it, and then he probably lost 1.5, 2 seconds from that just by having one whole lap behind Vettel, and then looking there 1.3 seconds to split Perez and Leclerc at the end. So those 2 seconds or 1.5 seconds he lost was absolutely crucial.
He had the same thing on Hamilton as well, like a few laps before Hamilton retired, really, where he lost another kind of lap and a half behind him. So yeah, just kind of echo what you said. I mean, if it's coming down to the drivers, then for Perez, then that's kind of not why he's there really, to be battling Ferrari's lead driver. So to kind of come down to a few seconds of getting second, then I still think fair play to him. But yeah, it's kind of he's there because he's not that absolute top dog driver. That's why he's in the second seat. So I think when it comes down to that, then that's kind of where things stand. So yeah, but yeah, still a very impressive season from Red Bull, and something for Ferrari to take. They ended up getting or holding second in the Constructors' Championship as well. So a bit of optimism to go into the off season, but they know they need to improve, and we'll see what happens when we get to start of next season.
There might be more optimism from senior personnel changes, but anyway.
We discussed this on the preview show, but Freddie, what do you make of all of this just quickly?
Oh, well, I mean, Gazzetta dello Sport usually have their ear to the ground when it comes to Ferrari. And Vasseur has been, Fred Vasseur, that is the Alfa Romeo team boss and former ART team and Renault team boss, who's been linked with taking Mattia Binotto's seat, just to, clarify the context of this. I think he would be a good signing. I think Mattia Binotto has always been a bit of an odd one for me in that he's a fantastic head of engineering. And it always felt like an odd appointment, in my opinion, to be the position he's in as team principal. What I do think is it would be really interesting to have him stay on as head of the technical side, but I think that's just a political move that just can't really work if this is all happening. But I mean, I think my opinion on this is that you take it as read when it's Gazzetta dello Sport about a Ferrari personnel move, and I think Fred Vasseur could give an entirely different character to Ferrari, which should be very interesting. But I would also say that Alfa Romeo Sauber isn't necessarily the team to look for when it comes to really well done seasons. So who knows?
Yeah, the first part of what he said is what me and Adam pretty much agreed with. Yeah.
So, in a word, do you think Binotto should stay or go?
It's not up to him.
No. Do you think Ferrari should keep him or get Vasseur in?
I don't think it will make a difference. So, I as much as I really like Fred Vasseur and would love to see this role for him, I don't know. I think it's a really difficult one.
Okay, well, we've had
I think there's an element of it where there's been an attempt at changing these problems, but it hasn't worked, or at least it's not gone far enough, and maybe it's just a case of self-realization needs to be brought properly to the forefront, and someone from the outside perhaps is the only way of doing that. Of course, Binotto is a Ferrari born and bred man, and so many people in Ferrari management positions are Ferrari born and bred. I think the only one I can really think of is Laurent Mekies, who's come from the FIA. But so maybe getting someone from the outside, but with close relations to people in the team, is a very good idea to take a different look.
Okay, so
that's my one word.
We've had a yes, a no, a don't know, but maybe leaning towards yes, that he should go. But another incident that may divide opinion or may not was with the other Ferrari, with Carlos Sainz on the first lap, where him and Hamilton were going into turn 6, and Hamilton cut the chicane in, pretty much carbon copy incident to what happened with Verstappen last year. I think Lewis thought he'd been squeezed out, and in fairness, he didn't really have anywhere to go on the right hand side.
I disagree. He had loads of. He turned away. I think he had room to back out and take the corner, but he chose not to because it'd be better for him to take the shortcut. So I think he was right, had to give the position back, because he definitely had room to avoid that and stay on the track.
I agree. I think there was just about a car length there. It wasn't like
and to back out.
Yeah. Well, no, I think for me it's more the case that there was a car's width just about for me, and that's the important thing. And I think you're right. He did choose to shortcut the chicane. It was very weird though how the stewards thought it was fine, but the FIA race director, I think it was Niels Vitek this weekend, told the teams to change their position. So they disagreed there. The FIA,
I think it was the FIA, because it was all a bit weirdly communicated, but it all came from the fact that at first it was Sainz who was under investigation, or at least opening a review,
Right.
on Sainz forcing a driver of the track, making declared, okay, that wasn't the case. So now we look at this with Hamilton,
I
and
see.
then Hamilton was told to give the position back.
I see. Sorry, I had two eyes on snooker. That's my excuse.
That's a good excuse. And Adam's just rewatched it.
Yeah, he's thinking like, oh, do I disagree or agree
Well, no, we
with
need to be
Adam and
careful
Nigel?
because we could hear the sound. So
Yeah.
Well, because I was interested when you said you think there was a cause there, because that wasn't my memory of it. So I was watching back.
It's very close
to see whether I thought it was, and I still don't think there is. I
think there's room for Hamilton to take it into his own hands and not to cut the corner and to back out of it and stay on track. And it's definitely, from my opinion, it's a decision from Hamilton to then cut the corner rather than to stay on track, because I think it's perfectly capable of him keeping his car within track limits and staying on track. He just would have lost a lot of time. So he's made the decision to then go across the curb.
Well, I think that kind of plays to a different issue, to be honest. I think you should.
I think the issue is
that
I don't what
side by side, then there should be space on the outside for both cars to go through. It's kind of what.
No, because you can't say that the issue plays to the fact that then the track then turns right. So then the track should be wide enough for a driver to then be able to just go off when he feels like it to stay with it. No, the issue there is that Hamilton was perfectly overtaken by Sainz. Sainz put his car in a position which meant that Hamilton had to back out or cut the corner, which is perfect racing and things like that. Hamilton chose not to back out. He chose to cut the corner. And that's then meaning that Hamilton hasn't technically lost as much time as he would do, which means he's cut the corner, and also meant that he had to give the position back to Sainz. But the issue here is Hamilton cutting the corner, nothing to do with the racing, because the racing is compromising the other driver, and Sainz compromised him perfectly so that he wasn't able to get a run, but Sainz was able to take the position and he was able to control Hamilton behind him.
I disagree. I don't think if you're coming up the inside on a corner, then on corner exit, if the driver's still side by side, you can run all the way to the outside, which is what Sainz did near enough. There was maybe like a wheel's width in it.
There was room for Hamilton to stay within track limits.
There wasn't if he was to say he had to back out. I mean, we said this already. He would have needed to.
Yeah, he wouldn't be able to stay side by side with Sainz. No, but that's just kind of normal racing, isn't it? Because obviously, he was able to stay within track limits and then would have to back out for them the next apex of whatever it is, turn 6. I can't remember, and the second part of the chicane. But like that's just the way that racing is. You put your car in a position to then pass the other car, not to then say, oh shit, oh, he's got to go past me. Of course, I've got to then back out. If Sainz was to do that, that's not racing.
If you're side by side going into the corner, then you should be able to be side by side coming out of it. You shouldn't just be ahead and on the inside and then be able to run all the way to the outside. Like I think
but he did. I don't think he did run all the way to the outside.
If you're making an overtake through a corner, then you should be leaving space all the way through the corner. And then if the overtake move is done, then that's fine. But if you're still side by side, you can't move over to the other side of the track while that driver's still there. I don't think.
It wasn't like he moved. One second, Adam. It wasn't like he moved over to the track, like the track forcing in a way with Hamilton. Like it wasn't like he was side by side there, then side by side, and then he went, oh, and I'm going to go right a bit more. It was the way he drove. He drove through the corner and then opened the steering in where Hamilton was, so that Hamilton was not ahead, but side by side, but not full. Not Sainz was the aggressor and the car that was earning the position, to a point where Hamilton then, if he had stayed in that position, would have been a crash. He would have been on track, but it would have been Hamilton's fault for the crash. It's similar. You can compare it to the Verstappen incident the week before, where Verstappen kept himself pinned in and things like that, and there was a crash. If Verstappen had backed out, then there wouldn't have been an incident, but he wouldn't have been able to be competitive. But that's just the way they were driving the corner, and you see this kind of move countless times, and it's a legitimate way of racing. And actually Sainz left more room than other drivers have in the past, in my opinion. Way more people have been forced off in that kind of thing in a legitimate way, and Sainz left room for Hamilton then stay on track and to legitimately back out, because if Hamilton had stayed in there, he would have got a penalty in the way that Verstappen had got a penalty in Brazil. So what was going on there, in my opinion, I guess, but the way I see it, and I think the way I see it is fairly standard, is that Sainz did leave enough room. He left an aggressive amount of room, but it was a room on the track to then
one wheel's width.
Yeah,
That's not enough room.
but that's the track limits, isn't it? If a car is fully 4 wheels over the white line, then they're outside the track limits. If we're talking a full car's width then for track limits, then that means everyone's getting the laps deleted and qualifying and all of that kind of thing.
If you're going over the curb that's raised as it is there, then I don't think one.
But he only went over the curb
enough.
because he turned to the right.
No,
to
if you're going into
the
a corner, well, then I don't think one wheel's width
the
is
raised
enough
curb,
when you've got a curb that's less than a car's width to the.
Are you saying a car
so,
should never be put onto the curbs in racing?
I don't think in that
watch a
scenario
qualifying
that
lap
you can
and
say,
watch a lap of a car and see how many times a wheel goes over the white line. Because
in that scenario where you've got something that you can't drive, you can't carry on driving over that, which is why he had to bail out and go right. Then you can't leave.
But that's the thing. That's the thing. But that brings it back to the point of this: is that the fact that he had to bail on sec. The fact that he had to bail out and go right.
What you said, in fairness, and I let you speak before. So I think if you're going into that corner, then that's not enough space to leave. It's what I said it in the previous show. I said it about the Verstappen incident, and I don't think it's like racing seems to have come like this. I don't remember so many of these incidents when I started watching, but it seems to become
drivers would back
more and
out.
more the case that if you take kind of, you know, a slight advantage coming out of a corner, then you can run right to the edge of the track. I mean, you saw it in Mexico.
He didn't run right to the edge of the track.
Russell had to go off. And it was okay there. They could carry on racing. But again, like, I'd like to see battles be able to be continued past the exit of the corner. And I think that you should leave racing room to do that. And I think that should be part of racing. I don't think it should be, if you're slightly ahead on the inside, then you can run all the way up to the outside and someone either has to back off or risk a crash.
Well, that's the thing. Like if racing was always going to be like that, then they'd just be side by side forever and it wouldn't make any sense anyway. Like at some point, a car has to come out on top. And in this instance, the way that Sainz was going to come out on top and the way he did come out on top was by putting it by going alongside Hamilton. Let's go through the whole thing. So like if you take it from like the start of it, Verstappen, that's a completely different driver. Sainz, you know, pulls out under the braking, gets alongside Hamilton under braking. They're both at the apex at pretty much the same time. Sainz does squeeze Hamilton out, but he squeezes him to the point where it's obvious what's going to happen. So either Hamilton sticks in it and it doesn't work, or he concedes in normal racing. But there's also still room for Hamilton to be, you know, not on the raised curb if he keeps it around with Sainz anyway. It's just then that would mean it would just be stupid for everyone going into the right hand part of that chicane. Hamilton rather than coming off the throttle and then turning in and taking the right hand turn in a normal way in track limits, the nature of the track, he goes over the raised curb, that the sort of sausage curb that's there, and cuts that corner and then ends up on the track ahead of Sainz. But Sainz has left him room to stay into that, to make that decision. The decision is all then placed on Hamilton from the way Sainz is raced. Hamilton can stay on, Hamilton can concede, Hamilton can cut the corner. And that's Sainz taking the position and then leaving everything then with Hamilton in Hamilton's side of the racing. And the way to continue the battle then for Hamilton, for him, the only option for him then is to cut the corner, which is then illegal, which means that the move from Sainz is perfectly legal. The way Hamilton reacted was illegal, but the move was completed in a completely legal fashion.
I think if you're going into a corner side by side and coming out of the corner while you're still side by side, the only option for a driver is to either back off or cut the corner. That's an extremely flawed system. It's a chicane. You should be able to continue racing through both parts of the chicane. And that, if you're saying that was Hamilton's option while they went in side by side, then I just don't like, that's not the kind of racing that I want to see. I'd rather cars leave space, and then we're going to get better battles. We're going to get people able to continue them through several sectors rather than just getting out. I mean, you said earlier, when does the overtake
I think an overtake though is to try and overtake, not to try and keep side by side with someone. Sainz is going into the move. He's trying to then complete the move. He's not trying to keep that move carried on. He's trying to complete the move. And the way to complete the move is to then just put a bit more of a squeeze on Hamilton to then try and be ahead of him and to complete the move. If it's all about being side by side,
when he forced him off.
But he was Hamilton's wheel was sort of alongside where Sainz's side pod was. So that's
still side by side. If he's the
lead car in that. He's the lead car. He has the corner in that instance. Sorry, he has the right to then the line because he's got himself in the position where he's the the driver driving the corner, and he does leave him room. And that's I feel no way either. I don't know how to end the sentence because I said the point. That's the way it is.
I'll throw it to Nigel. What do you think? Do you see what both me and Freddie are saying, first of all?
Yeah, absolutely. I always do. Yeah. And obviously sometimes I agree.
Sometimes transcript.
Yeah, I've got. But what I'll say is, first of all, one of the best debates we've ever had up there with George Russell, Valtteri Bottas, Imola 2021 crash, which was very good.
Which I think I was wrong with, to be honest, now in hindsight.
Yeah, it's getting that's one for me. But yeah, I do side with. It's an interesting one because it's a wider talking point in terms of what do we want to see from racing. I think you both got great points, and I don't think the FIA know. I don't think the stewards know who decide on whether it's something to penalty and whether something's not. That's why we see
the question, Nigel.
I agree with Freddie, as I said from the start.
Oh, okay. He hasn't ducked the question.
I never duck the question. I always answer the questions. But yeah, that was a great debate.
There'll be some questions that you'll duck. But yeah, I think kind of.
You could just do an IndyCar rolling start for the whole race if you want to, Adam. But where they're all side by side and have to stay side by side for the whole thing within every limit possible.
I think kind of where I'm coming from is like with it seems to be the way racing has gone. And so based off kind of maybe some previous incidents this year where this has been okay and that kind of squeezing out has been okay, then that's, maybe more consistent there. But I don't think that's the way it is. As I said, I don't think that's the way. And I don't think this was so common when I started watching.
But a key part, I think, is the wider cars. The cars are a bit wider, a bit longer. The tyres are bigger. So I think it's inevitable that there's always going to be a few more, as we've seen over the last few years, of these instances of because the cars are taking up more of the track. Was I think in before 2017 when they had the narrower cars, I think you could.
You look at the Rosberg Verstappen move in 2016 at that exact corner done in the exact same way.
Yeah,
they're able to stay side by side really nicely through that corner. That
I think that's because of the cars.
Yeah.
I think the cars is a key point of this, and I think that's something. I think that's an aspect that a lot of people forget, but it is a really interesting one. I do side with Freddie though.
It's an annoying thing because both drivers did the exact right thing in the incident that followed. Sainz squeezed and raced in the exact right way. And to be fair to Hamilton, the right thing to do competitively was to cut the corner and to then go ahead. Because we've seen so many times where the driver hasn't been asked to give the position back in that scenario. We saw it last year at Abu Dhabi, and I said in that podcast that I think Hamilton should have given the position to Verstappen after that. Even though Verstappen came from a very long way back, that Hamilton's reaction wasn't to fight the corner, it was to go straight over the runoff. And, we've seen drivers gain positions through that in the ways that realistically they shouldn't. And it's what we were saying about Gasly and Stroll in Mexico. Gasly just sent it and did a stupid move, but and just thought he was okay to keep the position and things like that. So there are elements to the debate, but both drivers did the right thing competitively for them. And it just so happened that because of things that have been passed up on in the past in terms of Hamilton, I think rightly Hamilton was told to give the position back in the end. So yeah, and that was then sorted in a nice, simple, easy way. Yeah. And I think it would have probably been better for Hamilton to give the position away immediately and to tuck into a slipstream and to keep as much momentum as possible. But that's a sore point.
So comparing this to the Verstappen Hamilton crash last week, which we also was Hamilton's fault, and I believe we all said should have been a penalty.
I've changed my mind on that. I think it was Verstappen's fault. I'm being serious.
That's great because you've already written the article about that. But I mean, if you've still got the same view, then that's again Hamilton not leaving space on the inside for Verstappen.
That's different because
it's different because of the second corner
with his car leg, with his side pod. It's certainly behind his front wheel. So,
no, that's different because say if Sainz and Hamilton stayed side by side and Sainz cuts across, that's Sainz's fault. That's what Hamilton did with Verstappen. But Verstappen also in Brazil took a lot of speed, probably a bit too much speed looking back on it. But that didn't happen because Hamilton cut the corner, which is not allowed. So it's completely different, I'd say, because they didn't take turn 7 today. with the second part of the chicane. Whereas in Brazil, they did take the second part of the chicane together.
Yeah, Hamilton put Verstappen in the position to back out in the way that Hamilton did in Abu Dhabi. Sainz did that, and Hamilton backed out. Verstappen didn't back out, and there was a collision, which then kind of means that from both drivers really are probably instigators to that collision. And I know what Nigel means, and sort of starting to come around to the view that it was more Verstappen's fault than Hamilton's actually in that instance. So it speaks to the, like you say, the whole sort of weird thing with it, and that drivers should give each other room, otherwise these kind of things happen. But also drivers should concede, otherwise these kind of things happen, because if drivers are always sort of saying, oh, but they might want to keep the battle going, then an overtake is never made. And if a driver never concedes, then collisions happen. So I think, to be honest, there needs to be more onus in this instance, in this racing world, on drivers conceding a position and having another go. There's such a sort of thing about, in my opinion, about overtake never being completed that I think kind of leads to these kind of instances and weird 45-year-long debates about a lap one clash that was resolved very easily between the two drivers.
Okay, I think we've reached the end of that. But yeah, I'd like to
thank you for listening to the podcast.
Sebastian Vettel,
Thank you, Seb. Have a good one. See you later.
I was trying to find the because I remember one of the very first podcasts we did was Bottas and Verstappen battling at either the Austrian or the Styrian Grand Prix. That was an absolutely fantastic battle, and I think that all came from leaving the space and not kind of claiming the corner.
That's poor on Bottas.
And I think I would like.
Bottas.
I'd like to see, with things like Hamilton and Verstappen last week, like Sainz and Hamilton this week, I kind of like to see those battles be able to go through and both drivers kind of leave space. But maybe it is a car thing.
It's the annoying thing, because you've got moves like Verstappen on Leclerc in Austria 2019, where Verstappen just drove into him and Leclerc ended up way off the track, and that was, that became a victory for Verstappen. And you've got times where that kind of thing is allowed and times where it's not allowed, and that was definitely, in my opinion, an illegal overtake. And it's just like that was, you look at what happened today between Sainz and Hamilton, and it was jolly good show racing comparatively to that. So I don't know. I know the incident you're talking about with Bottas and Verstappen as well, the second race of 2020. And that was very good racing, but there was a big gravel trap there. So even if one of them did try and own the corner, then, it wouldn't have worked. And the race before that, we saw Hamilton try and own the corner and get a 5-second penalty for Albon going off into the gravel. So there are other sides to it. So it's basically, the whole problem is the fact that racing happens. And everyone should just stick behind each other. Then we wouldn't have these kind of incidents, because everything's different. Everything's the same, but everything's different and everything's the same. And stewards want to think everything's the same, but they also say everything's different. And we sit here saying everything's different, everything's the same, and everything's different, and everything's the same. And nothing makes sense to anyone. And we all want to have opinions and sides. And I want to cry.
I quite like racing. Anyway,
I like Le Mans because they're all a minute apart from each other, and there's never any incidents anyway.
Oh, there we go. I
like snooker.
Let's watch the Indy 500, where if the car does squeeze another car, they all crash. So let's watch that. It's actually fantastic fun, and snooker's great too.
Oh God. Let's move on, mate. Let's move on.
Let's move on. Freddie's. I'm not going to say that. So Sebastian Vettel finished his F1 career with points in the top 10. It was quite. Actually, Hamilton retired first, which allowed both Vettel and Ricciardo to finish in the points. But yeah, a kind of quick word on Vettel, because it was really all weekend, to be honest. I did. It was quite a kind of like feel good element, and Vettel's last, although obviously he had the race and he finished in the points, then I think maybe his more significant impact from this weekend was the dinner that the drivers all had to celebrate his retirement. And it seemed like most of them came out saying we should do this more often. Why haven't we done this? I think Alonso said it was Shanghai 2016 that they'd last done one, although he was out a few years. But yeah, I think, that is, for me, that's a really nice Vettel legacy to come out, that maybe the drivers think they should spend more time together and do things like that, and they're not so different as they think. But Nigel, I'll throw to you because you've not had as much to say in this podcast.
That's fine.
Yeah, what do you when you see Vettel going out like that, what are you thinking? What's his kind of legacy, favorite moment, all of that?
He's one of the greats, one of the modern day greats. I wouldn't go I think I've said this before, I wouldn't go as far as a legend, but what he's done on the track with his 4 world titles, some of the races he's had, some of the qualifying sessions he's had. I mean, he was an absolute qualifying gauge during his heyday in Red Bull, especially 2011, 2013, some of his laps in 2010, which won him the first title as well. He's had one of the very few weekends, and by few, I literally mean 3 or 4 weekends in F1 history where I can give a driver a 10 out of 10 for a whole weekend rating, which never happens apart from Hamilton Brazil 2021, perhaps. But his Monza 2008, of course, his first win with Toro Rosso, one of the best weekends I have ever seen. And to do that at such a young age was just unbelievable. If we were doing a podcast on that, my word, it would just be superlatives for 55 minutes probably or something. And I do feel
we'd be slagging off Sebastian Bourdais for the whole episode.
Yeah,
even though technically he qualified 4th and retired actually. But anyway,
I think Vettel, for me, he did peak early. He did make mistakes at Ferrari. It's a shame he never quite won that title, even though he had a couple of chances. But he's had some great races, some great moments. And I think those moments, we think about like Malaysia 2015, his first Ferrari win, some of his other Ferrari wins, there we go, words, were amazing.
The episode.
Yeah, no, well, yeah, and even his Red Bull stuff as well. So, yeah, it's just amazing. And of course, what he's done off the track recently has been a voice for people, really, to listen to, listen, there's climate change, there's a bit of it is a crisis, you could argue, and some people would say I would agree with that. And he's trying to make people aware of that, and him and Lewis Hamilton have been very vocal on that. I think that takes a lot in sport, because I do feel some drivers do hold back because they are sports people and feel they can't talk about these things. But Vettel has changed that over the last 2 or 3 years, which I respect a lot. But yeah, in terms of his driving, absolutely brilliant. Just a shame he couldn't win a title with Ferrari.
I think it's a real shame that we never got to see Red Bull and Vettel go up against Hamilton and Mercedes in their kind of respective heydays, because that would have just it's such a near miss. But yeah, it just never came together to where both of them were kind of in, at their absolute peak in machinery.
Best frame of mind. Yeah.
But yeah, I'd agree. I think there's obviously the stat that he's never won starting lower than 4th, and that I think that really lower than 3rd. But I think that's kind of a backhanded criticism, really, because I think that speaks to just how good he was on Saturdays and how good he was then able to turn those into race wins. And like you said, Nigel, he just had so many weekends where he was strong throughout and he made it work on the Saturday, and then was able to put that to the sword on the Sunday. There are a lot of wins where he just wouldn't be featured on TV because he just run away with it, and that would be that. And it was, at the time, kind of in the running for 2013, when he just won everything, it was a bit, I'd kind of like a bit more going on here. But looking back, it is, a real achievement, and 4 world titles in a row. There are not many drivers who have done that. Senna never did it. Prost never did it. I think it's Hamilton and Schumacher and Vettel and Fangio.
Hamilton get 4 in a row.
Yeah, 17, 18, 19, 20.
Yes,
so yeah, it's a very elite club, and I think to be at that level for so long is really impressive. And yeah, just to kind of echo what Nigel said at the end, I think you kind of, when you're a sportsman and when you're in his position and when you're in F1, then it's very easy for a lot of people to shoot you down for what you're saying and kind of supposed hypocrisies and whatever. So I think for him to come out and do that and do what he has, and then actually step away so that he can carry on that fight and devote more of his time to it, just, speaks to the person he is. And to see all of the F1 drivers kind of rallying around that was really nice as well.
Yeah, I think I'm only going to echo what you guys say, but I love Seb. I think he's a phenomenal driver. I've always backed him. I'm wearing my Seb Vettel t-shirt now because
on YouTube to see it.
Yes, give us YouTube views. I think he's extraordinary, and I think what just really makes him special isn't just his driving, like you guys say. It's his character, his personality, his off-track supremacy is exceptional. And just, you can't look at him and think a poor guy, a poor sentiment on anything. He's got so much going for him, and his on-track performance has always been really good, in my opinion. I think he's had off moments, and I think I've always been of the belief that if he was in a good kind of frame of mind with Ferrari, he would have been insane there. But because of all the stuff with controlling the team and things like that, it didn't work. And like I completely echo what Adam says about if you had Hamilton in good frame of mind with Mercedes and Vettel with good frame of mind with Red Bull up against each other, it would be one of those title fights that is you couldn't even call it, because it'd be way too exceptional on both sides. Because I do think Hamilton wasn't in his best frame of mind with McLaren, and that held him back, and Vettel wasn't in his best frame of mind with Ferrari, and that held him back. And I think that in both drivers speaks to excellent performances in those eras as well. I think it's just, he's won 53 races, 14 of those with Ferrari, 39 with Red Bull, and 1 with Toro Rosso. He's got 122 podiums. He's got 4 world championships, and those are, as much as F1 tried to put way more races in there to try and make every driver a record-breaking driver and things like that, it's still impossible for loads of people to even get anywhere close to a fraction of those stats. So they're not to be sniffed at, and I'm going to really miss him in Formula One. I think it's obvious that I've not been at my most eloquent in this, but I was welling up at points today watching the coverage. They did some fantastic tributes on the Sky television, on the Formula One television across the weekend, and where you collect Formula One coverage. You've seen fantastic tributes to Sebastian Vettel, and unfortunately I feel like I'm not doing this justice, but he's just a driver who's, for the whole time I've been really properly watching Formula One, has stood out to me, and someone I've really resonated with, and someone I'm going to fantastically miss seeing and fantastically miss supporting on a daily basis, weekly basis. And I'm really feel kind of honored to have supported him when he is winning, and when he is successful, and when he is in Formula One, and when he is making excellent changes and being a supreme standout citizen that makes me want to be a better person and makes me want to have a fraction of the difference he can make as part of my daily life. And I look at that and think, what an impressive, just phenomenal young man that he is, because he is a young man. He's 35, and he's got the head and his shoulders of someone who's lived 1,000 lives and has changed so many lives for the better, and he has done that. And I'm a better person because of Sebastian Vettel. I will put my hands up and say that. So thank you, Seb.
Well, I think that was despite your kind of doubting how eloquent you are, I think that was a very good way to finish the discussion on Seb. And it was kind of fitting that he and Ricciardo were battling it out at the end. Ricciardo, obviously the person that kind of kicked the neck phase of his Ferrari career when he came in and outperformed him in 2014, and they fought at the end, and Vettel couldn't quite get the pass done, which would have put them ahead of Alfa Romeo in the Constructors' Championship. So Alonso will get more winter wheel time on the car next season. So, great for him. But yeah, Daniel Ricciardo also finishing in the points at the end there. Do you think we'll see him again in F1?
Yes, I think we will. 2024. I'm not sure which team. It's very difficult to say right now because it depends on what happens over the next 7-8 months. But yeah, I'm quite confident we will because I think a lot of teams will see his bad patch at McLaren as a McLaren thing rather than a him thing. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. But I think that's how a team like Haas or a team like maybe even Aston Martin or something or Alpine would see it, I think.
Freddie?
It's an interesting one because it's a weird place for Ricciardo to be in his career, to be in having the kind of Albon year. But it is exactly that. And I think Perez really solidified how difficult it was for Albon and Gasly at Red Bull. And I think if you look at, and we've had this discussion before, but if you look at McLaren, Sainz is the sort of odd one out driver in that team who hasn't really kind of been built into the team in a way that Lando has been, because he's been there since he could touch the pedals of an F1 car, in the way that the car was built for Fernando Alonso. And Ricciardo's got then the poor kind of form of that, and so did Stoffel Van Dorn, you could say. And I think they're two drivers who deserve to be on the Formula One grid. And I think on performances in McLaren, both of them probably didn't, but on performances everywhere else for both of them, they deserve it. So I think yeah, it is a McLaren thing, and I do think that has made it less likely for him to be on the grid, though. So yeah. I don't know if it will really depend on how next year develops with Oscar Piastri, because if Piastri is suffering in a similar way, which is hard to sort of believe based on his junior career, then that could be Daniel Ricciardo's saving grace and Oscar Piastri's fall. But
I agree.
I don't really know what I want to happen in that. I want Oscar to do fantastically, and I to be honest, I would have wanted Daniel to do fantastically. But like, I want both things to happen now. I want Daniel to be kind of given a reprieve, but I also want Oscar to do excellently. So Daniel Ricciardo's career hangs in the balance of Oscar Piastri, and maybe so does Stoffel Van Dorn's, but that's clutching at straws for me as a fan. But anyway, I need to put my Formula E hoodie back on. But anyway, and I think I can't see him getting another race drive, but I couldn't see Hülkenberg getting another race drive, or Magnussen, so who knows?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I think he is kind of the new Hülkenberg in terms of he's the one that will be linked with a lot of seats, really. He's got that experience since 2012, I think, with HR. No, it was earlier than that.
11 with HRT, 12
halfway through
season with
season.
Toro Rosso.
Yeah, and he impressed in what was a truly awful car there. But I think, he's kind of got that. Yes, him and Hülkenberg have had different careers, but in terms of, I think, the way they're ending, with Hülkenberg, when he did leave, it was kind of, you've got Ricciardo coming in, and there's just kind of not maybe that obvious landing spot. And I think, give him a bit of time out. And I think, like you said, Nigel, that kind of, I think partly just the bad, the immediate memory of the last 2 years will be kind of put in context of his whole career. And, I think teams will look at that and think, did he really become that bad of a driver effectively overnight? And I kind of think that he'll be viewed more favourably in a year or two. I think if I was him, I maybe wouldn't have counted myself out of the kind of any potential seat, say, at Williams and Haas, the way that it sounds like he did. But that's his choice, and he knows what he wants. So I think he'll definitely be back, because I think in a few years there will be teams looking for a kind of experienced head who's out of a drive, and there's not really many of those around. Since Hülkenberg's come back, then obviously drivers will lose their seats next year. But I don't really, if you're looking for drivers on the market with more than 2 years F1 experience, then there's really not that many there.
And I think crucially, in the past few years, we have started viewing drivers differently, and we do talk about the really cutthroat world of Formula One, and I think us as fans for a long time can be guilty of that. But we are thinking of drivers in different ways, and I think it goes back to what we were talking about with Vettel and things like that, and sort of the mindset of drivers at certain points and drivers in different positions and in their life and what team they're in, because the sort of bog standard opinion of a good driver is a driver who's good anywhere, adaptable and things like that. But I think as Formula One cars have developed, it's a much harder opinion to sort of hold water and really, because I think you can only, I don't really know anyone who would be adaptable in this sort of way. You look at Fernando Alonso when he started with Alpine in 2021. We talk about Fernando Alonso as he's a fantastic, superior, mercurial driver who's unreal everywhere, but he still struggled to get to grips with it. Ocon really struggled to get to grips with it as well, but they're building and building and building and things like that. So I do think there is a shift, and there should, at least, even if there isn't, there should at least be a shift in the way that we judge drivers in these kind of scenarios. And yes, if you've got a driver who's just, really struggling for pace, it doesn't add, much to the adverts to another team. But if he's a driver who's won 7 times with Red Bull and then another time with McLaren anyway, when the car's working, if he proves that when it's working, it's good, if you can take that and work that with him, then that's a really good look. What's crucial here is that obviously they weren't able to change and make it work with McLaren, with Ricciardo, but he was right to have the second season. And like you look at with Vettel, if they could have changed sort of mentality at Ferrari, maybe it could have, but he was also spinning, he was making the mistakes and things like that. So it's a two sides of the coin kind of thing, but there are lots of ways to look at this, and the driver second chance never used to happen, but it happens now, and it works wonders. Look at Magnussen, look at Albon, so Perez, and maybe it will work with Hulkenberg, maybe it will work really well with Ricciardo in the future, and I would be okay with that, because second chances for a lot of these drivers are definitely well deserved.
I agree. The one, I mean, it was very early on. Let's say, slammed Ricciardo. Like it was only a dozen races in last year. But I will say, the one characteristic that and the reason I haven't been slated him as much this year is that I do feel he gave up, and I feel he's not shown himself that well to deal with a difficult situation. And that is the one characteristic that I feel I'm a bit disappointed by, is that to give up. Well, he might not have given up, but it did look like he lost a bit of that fight. And I do think that's why he needs that break. That's why he needs this year out, so he can recover and then come back fighting. So I think that's more important than getting straight back on the horse. I think for someone who's been driving for over a decade, he does need this break. But I do think he did give up a little bit.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from that. I think, it was a difficult situation. Both team and driver needed to separate from each other, and I think so. Sometimes when when you're fighting for something for so long and it's just not working, that is what happens. But I don't think that kind of speaks to him, overall. And I think, he will be back. He will most likely be landing with Red Bull after Helmut Marko announced they'd signed him before they announced they'd signed him. And Christian Horner gave a fantastic, my favourite quote of the weekend to the media, where he said, well, we haven't signed him, but Helmut's announced it. So I guess that means that we have signed him, unless, of course, he hasn't signed, but he will be with us next season and he'll be doing simulator work and test runs and all of that. So we're looking forward to having him, unless we haven't signed him, but hopefully we will have him. And you will hear about that in due course when we sign him, if we do sign him, and you will hear about that, which was brilliant. So I like that.
It's a fantastic quote, and it is very much making Christian Horner finally sound like a person. But Daniel did say to Sky, it's essentially just signing it. We just need to agree a few terms, and that's fine.
Horner said it better. I've not said that many times on this podcast.
I think Horner has said that it's not a reserve role. Am I right in saying that it's a developmental role and a behind the scenes role?
Yeah,
is an ambassadorship, which is
it's a third driver.
Yeah, so I think Lawson's presumably still the reserve, and or perhaps I don't know, maybe they'll put Iwasa in that role for some races as well. But it's a salary, isn't it? Frankly, and I would be surprised if Ricciardo isn't testing a lot of different cars next year outside of Formula One, and I think he should be. because he would be an extreme asset to a lot of those teams. And if you're ahead of a championship like WEC, like IndyCar, if you're not desperately trying to get a team to sign Daniel Ricciardo in a Bernie Eccleston style way, then you're missing a trick, because what he can bring to that is so much. He can bring Netflix. Netflix will do an IndyCar race with Drive to Survive anyway. There'll be an episode set in IndyCar if Daniel Ricciardo goes there. So commercially, for these kind of series that I really want to do well, it'd be great to get Ricciardo, but also for Ricciardo as a driver, I think he would do really well there. And I really hope he doesn't cling on to Formula One to the detriment of his career, because I completely get why he would. Because if it were me and I'd done moved from Australia to Europe to try and do this, and then it was taken away from me, I would cling on, and I completely get why he's clinging on. But I hope for his sake that at one point he does also have a look around.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and 3 more drivers to touch on, and we have about 5 minutes to do it, so we're going to have to be a bit swift on it as Freddie finishes his wine. But Logan Sargeant
wine, bloody hell,
got his Williams seat for next season. He slipped place in the championship, but he finished 4th. That was more than what he needed to do. Anyway, Nigel, a few words.
Yeah, he deserves it. I will say the 2 races he did, it was visibly, he was like very edgy watching him. I think he could tell that he just wanted to stay out of an incident or crash and that kind of thing. So I don't think we saw the best of him in Abu Dhabi. But what we will get is a very exciting driver. A brilliant lineup for Williams as well. Albon and Sargeant, probably the strongest lineup they've had for some time, I'd think. And it's good for F1 to have an American driver. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about how I think we're all impressed by Sargeant, to go back and watch that. So I think he's going to fit in well with F1. He should be a good fit for Williams, I think.
And best Williams lineup since Webber and Rosberg?
Probably, yeah. Is that 2005, 6?
6.
6, yeah.
Depending on your opinion of Kubica.
Bottas and Massa, not too bad.
Yeah, Bottas and Massa. I think there were definitely negatives in that lineup. But to echo what Nigel said, definitely a point, and he's mega. Let's have him line up, and from F3 to get him into the academy, and then to think, he's continues to be mega. Yeah, let's have him. And I really like that from a team, and I think they just embellished that pretty well at Williams.
Yeah, that means that as one North American driver comes in, then another bows out of F1. Nicholas Latifi. Freddie, some words on him, but not too many.
Lovely guy, really capable at points, but just this year was torrid for him. And unfortunately, because like we've said before, we were all in the opinion that he definitely deserved the 3rd year in F1 last year. And he was qualifying fantastically and racing fantastically for definitely the second half of 2021, and was really really solidifying his place in Formula One. But this year just hasn't worked, and he's had some good moments, but just also hasn't. And I think, you look at weekends like Monza, and it's just not worked for him. And, he's had a good time of it, and I think he's in the top 10, maybe top 15 of most experienced drivers for Williams anyway. So take that and enjoy Lavazza. And, he's such a pleasant man to be in Formula One, but it's a shame it hasn't worked out. But hopefully whatever he does next will be nice.
It's just, I agree.
So do I. And final driver stepping away for now, at least, Mick Schumacher. We might talk more about him in a future episode about where he may land. But it was kind of a quiet Grand Prix, apart from when he tagged Latifi and they both went into the wall. That was a great end to his career in F1 for now. But Nigel, circling back to you to finish again, a few words on Schumacher. Where do you think he'll go next?
Oh, good question. That.
Well, sure. Maybe not that. Maybe just heading into the off season. Where is he at? I guess.
I think it was harsh to lose his seat. I think we had this debate a couple of weeks ago. I think he should have kept his seat rather than Hulkenberg. I think he's very much improved this year. Just hasn't had the car to have it in the second half of the season. He's matched or even been better than Magnussen. So I think he's just been a bit unfortunate with the timing of his improvement, and I'd love to see him at a different team that's not Haas, because I think he'd be much better. So it's a shame that he's gone, but just like Ricciardo, I think we will see him back.
I agree. And we will, as I say, talk more about that and a lot of other storylines heading into the F1 off season. So stay tuned for those because they will be dropping. And it'll be kind of nice to, kind of have a bit more time and freedom to explore some of those.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for joining us. Anyone who's joined us through this season, because it's been a fantastic year. I've really enjoyed it. And
Our third season.
Yeah, third season
Our
as
third
a
F1
podcast.
season done.
Closing in on 200 episodes.
Our third set of F1 regs.
Woo! So thank you very much for listening. We'll see you in the off season, and goodbye.
Bye-bye. Stay